the toughest and most exciting congressional races in the country. There are several in New York, but one of the most important ones right here, the 20th CD, where Scott Murphy is being challenged. He, of course, won in a special election a year and a half ago or so when Kirsten Gillibrand became a U.S. Senator by appointment. And initially he defeated Jim Tedisco, who was then the Assembly Minority Leader. But he's got a much tougher candidate now in Chris Gibson, a native of Kinderhook, a guy who lives just a few blocks from where he grew up. He's a former Army colonel who had several tours of duty in Iraq, and he's a Cornell graduate with a Ph.D. He taught at West Point, the last I recall. He's been with us before a couple of times, I think, and he's good enough to stop by the Post Media Center here at the Capitol this morning. Good morning, Chris. Great to see you.
Hey, Fred. Great to be with you.
Let me, people would appreciate it more if your mic was turned up. I apologize for that. And we'll note that your brother is joining you here. Is he your campaign aide de camp, so to speak?
Yeah, trusted confidant. It's great to be with you, Fred. Thanks very much.
Great to have you. And how are things looking in the campaign? Maybe you can give us a quick sense of how you think things are going.
Very encouraging. We're very active. We're out every day connecting with voters all across the district. Feel a very broad coalition. Republicans, conservatives, independents, Tea Party movement followers, and Democrats looking for a better way. All coming together to restore our republic, to get our private sector economy going, and to balance the budget, protect our freedoms.
It's an interesting time to have you in here. As I was mentioning earlier, today's a very important House vote and sort of a second phase or third phase, depending on how one wants to count it, I think, of a stimulus. This seems to be designed to help the teachers' unions and the hospital coalitions to get more FMAP money, which is Medicaid money, unrestricted Medicaid money, and money directly to school districts from the federal government to reverse some of the cuts and economies that have been made. Here in New York, I think in a way it's a kind of a betrayal because we just had months of fighting over reducing a budget to try to get it in line with revenues, and then all of a sudden the federal government stepping in and adding $1 billion back into the budget, which is not going to be a recurring source of revenue. My guess would be that your opponent, Scott Murphy, is going to be voting for this. I don't know if he's on the record, but where do you stand on today's vote?
Well, I would be against it. It's certainly not a fiscally conservative bill. If these are national priorities, then they need to be budgeted for. We need to pay for them. And this bill does not do that. This adds $10 billion in new taxes, and according to CBO, it violates PAYGO. It adds over $12 billion to the deficit.
Well, this measure to be likely passed today does seem to be aimed at bailing the Democrats out of the November election, does it not? Because every poll is indicating very big losses, especially in the House, for the Democrats. The teachers' unions are central to the Democrats' coalition, along with other public employee unions. They're the ones behind pushing this now.
Well, as I said, it clearly is not fiscally conservative. So, we look at it, and you can be skeptical of the motivations of it. If these are national priorities to assist in these areas in education and with FMAP for Medicaid, they should have been budgeted. Fred, this is the first time since 1974 we have no budget. We have no budget.
No formal federal budget? Is that what you're saying?
There is no formal federal budget. Without a budget, you can't govern. There's no plan for job creation. There's no plan to balance the budget.
Well, they have a printing press, don't they?
Well,
they just keep printing it.
See, we're on the wrong path, Fred. I mean, we're on the path to centralization and dependency. We need to get off it.
Where does Scott Murphy stand on this, do you know? I mean, I assume he's presumably generally a loyal Democrat, even though he tries to carve out a more independent role for himself, that he'll vote for this. What do you think? Politically, he probably shouldn't.
I don't know where he is on it. I've seen some comments.
I mean, the local papers called him up and said, Mr. Congressman, you're our representative. Tell us where you stand.
I infer from comments of his campaign manager that he's for it, but I'm calling on Mr. Murphy to vote no.
By the way, my observation or my question was kind of a shock because I don't think local papers are covering their local officials, and maybe papers generally aren't, as well as they should have. In past years, before an important vote like this, you would have local papers call up the office of their congressman or call the Congress member directly and say, tomorrow's a key vote, where do you stand? And have a story today in the local papers on where the local Congress people stand. Tonko, who's a very liberal Democrat, I'm sure he's voting for this. But given politically your challenge to Scott Murphy, I think there's a question there, and it would have been nice to see a story. Maybe I missed it. Did you see any stories in the paper today?
Yeah, well, I was contacted. Maury Thompson from the Glens Falls Post-Star.
Okay.
He blogged about it. I don't know that he actually did a printed story. I hope he did.
Did he have the position of yourself and Murphy in his blog item?
He he had my position and he had the position of the campaign manager for Mr. Murphy, to my knowledge.
Presumably speaking for the for
Right.
Murphy. What did he say? That Murphy would be voting for it?
Well, I'm inferring that from the comments because he's criticizing me for some aspects of my position on it. But, once again, Mr. Murphy has said, and he said repeatedly, he's a fiscal conservative and a budget hawk. And what we're asking is that he square his actions with his words. Because this bill, more new taxes, more regulations, it certainly does not square with the deficit. We're going to add $12 billion. So by any definition, any reasonable definition of a fiscal conservative, this is not fiscally conservative.
We're talking to Chris Gibson, a Republican candidate for Congress in the 20th CD. A lot of people hate politics. I've heard over the years many politicians say, especially the fundraising side of it, it's an awful grind, and they find it humiliating. Other candidates, I think of, and elected officials, I think to one good example of it was Al D'Amato, the former senator, used to seem to thrive on being out on a campaign trail and really enjoyed it. How do you feel? This is the first time you've run for public office, I believe. You're a former military guy and private sector guy. Are you enjoying this? You finding it rougher than you thought? Give us some sense of how you feel.
And I'm going to answer that. Let me also say that Jimmy Vilcon, I think, is going to do a story on that. I want to make sure I state that because
But today's the vote. I was just saying it would have been nice to see a story that before the vote was taken, ask the candidates and the incumbents where they stand on it. But how do you feel? How do you feel about campaigning? Are you enjoying it at all?
Well, I am. I love people. My wife and I really enjoy being with folks, and we get an opportunity every day to listen to the concerns. In large measure, the message we hear is concerning. But you know what? The indefatigable will of the American people is still apparent. We can overcome this. With the right choices, our best days are still in front of us. But to make those choices, we need the right leaders. So, I would tell you that we, the people, we are in charge of this country, and in November we'll bring a new set of leadership to Washington, D.C., and begin to restore our republic in January.
We the people. That has a little bit of a cliche-ish ring to it, does it not? I mean, Scott Murphy, I mixed them up in my head. Scott Murphy was elected by the people. I mean, he defeated an elected official who is pretty well known. So what allows you to make the claim that you represent the people as opposed to, you say, your opponent?
Well, because among the things I hear is alienation, an aspect that D.C. doesn't listen to. The will, the concerns of the people.
You mean the 11% popularity, D.C.? Our Congress is probably at the lowest ebb in modern times in terms of public approval.
Well, Fred, and
is that what you?
that is, and I'll tell you, there's also disaffection. There's with this vote that Mr. Murphy took, a belief that he had articulated he was against.
Which vote? The healthcare vote.
The healthcare vote, which he had initially voted against, and in the town hall meetings that he had throughout the district. There are those that got the impression that he would stay on that position.
So he was against it before he was for it.
Right. So I hear this consistently as I move all about the district.
I was going to ask you about. Hold on for a second here. There's a couple of sad stories coming out of Alaska where Ted Stevens, the former senator, was on a plane that's crashed, and now it's saying ex-NASA head Sean O'Keefe was on the plane. It's not clear whether the people on the plane have been killed or not, but that's the way it's sort of sounding. So I just wanted to break for a second on the breaking news. In terms of, Chris, the messages you're hearing from the voters, what do you think one or two strongest ones are? I said to you off air, and I'll just repeat it on air, that not since the Vietnam War have I sensed such disaffection with the government, their federal government, and concerns about the future of the nation as I sense from so many people, more so than ever since that time. Is that your sense? And give us a sense of what the one or two or three top issues seem to be.
Well, absolutely, and it's related to the point you just made moments ago, and it's about the unpopularity of Congress, a feeling that Congress doesn't focus on the problems of our time. The major problems of our time, getting the private sector economy going and restoring fiscal responsibility in our federal budget. And so these are the two major points that I hear time and time again. And it's also reinforced by our freedoms, a concern that our government is stepping on our freedoms. You're looking at individual mandates coming on health care. It's one thing after another, concerned about any kind of legislation that come after guns. A belief that a country that started with the animating principle of limited government, that we could live free without a king, without a queen, without aristocracy, that over time we've gotten on a path to centralization, that has encroached on our freedoms.
Much more European in orientation, the kind of thing that the revolutionary colonists wanted to leave behind.
Well, there's some irony, I think, in this election, because at a time when our president is reaching